all throughout my teenage years and early young adulthood, I went to a lot of self-development slash career orientation slash interview preparation workshops. It was just something you got to do, especially if you had a business focus in your education. And invariably, they would ask the participants in these workshops, what is your 5-year plan? What is your long-term vision? And that would always put me, and usually the others as well, on the spot. Sure, you had the typical answers, and mine were a part of that as well, that we want to finish high school or college and find a job in X field and be a Y. But I always felt that I was shortchanging them, and more importantly, myself in my answers, and that there was something essential missing in these prefabricated answers. It just never felt right. So let me ask you then, what is your vision for yourself? What is the grand scheme behind what you're doing? Pause the podcast if you want and write it down. Or if you can't do that, just clarify a sentence or sentences in your mind. What is it? How do you feel when you say it? Are you satisfied with your answer? Or is there a sense of discomfort? Something like what I felt when I was being asked these questions. Let's continue. What goals do you have set to achieve this? Some of you will be able to tell me very clear, even memorized answers. Others will be more vague. Most people don't have an answer. Next. Do you have step-by-step plans written down to get there? Now we're getting into goal management territory, and I recognize that this is challenging enough. Let me really raise the bar and ask you, why are these your goals? What core needs are you trying to satisfy? Now we're at the level that I'm aiming for here, self-knowledge. Hello, and welcome to the Valiant Growth Podcast. My name is Philip Frey, and today we will be talking about a system of finding self-knowledge driven purpose and goals. So let's make sure you're never awkward at a workshop or an interview ever again if these things happen in your life. But even more importantly, let's make sure that you have an answer for yourself, for the parts in you that thirst for action but need enlightened leadership. Also, developing purpose is, I think, one of the significant aspects of a multi-pronged assault on the question of procrastination. It isn't sufficient alone, but it is crucial, especially for long-term resilience and happiness. An argument is made sometimes that one should begin by learning of and implementing habit building and productivity systems applied to whatever's going on in one's life right now. And once some self-esteem is built, once a sense of proficiency is there, based on a history of success, purpose is then to be addressed. Now, that makes a lot of sense to me, and I would go further and add that, as with other self-knowledge related exploration, it must be made from a situation of safety and stability. If you can't pay your next month's rent, developing purpose is not the best investment of your time. Or more precisely, the basic need for shelter creates and presents you with a clear purpose. It is when such needs are met to some degree, when there's a sense of stability and safety, that work can begin on fulfilling more complex needs, where goals are no longer automatically discovered and being conscious becomes really important. Using your mind proactively becomes really important. And this is basically Abraham Maslow's idea of the pyramid of needs, which you might be familiar with. If not, Google it. It's pretty often taught as just basic level psychology. So once you have a level of stability and the functional level of productivity in place, I don't mean anything fancy, just being capable of feeding yourself, clothing yourself, generating the income to do that without major particular issues, then work can begin. And I'm guessing most of you listening to this podcast are in a situation similar to this, and if not, check out the podcast on procrastination. I think actually there's a lot of synergy between ground level productivity learning in the sense of the everyday, day-to-day, hour-to-hour work and goal achievement related learning. Goal achievement and goal setting related learning. You will be able to dream farther when you know that you can actually do more day to day, and being better aligned with your needs in turn will give you a reason to further develop your principles of productivity and goal achievement. And I really want to draw your attention to the fact that just as productivity ninjas are very impressive, so are people who have well-defined and well-aligned purposes. Once you learn to recognize it, once you can see it in others, there is an incredible ease of mind and centeredness coming from purpose clarity, knowing what you really want in the sense of core needs, and knowing that you have carefully looked at the options to get those needs met, and that you will look again from time to time, so that is not a pressure on your mind. It will give you a lot of inner peace and a lot of freedom, a lot of clarity. The clarity of not being lost between competing goals, a freedom from not being able to be assertive, a freedom from people who abuse you by substituting their own goals for yours, which is very, very, very common. I see people who have really well-defined and connected purposes as these quiet forces of nature. They're not the most flashy, and they're not doing heroic last stands against an avalanche of incoming tasks. They're not firefighters, which is always very impressive, but they are instead calmly steamrolling their way to ever greater growth and connection. I must stress, though, that this is automatic only when and as far as solid productivity systems are built in place as well. It's the multi-pronged attack, as I said previously. And I insist on getting the value of being well connected to your core needs, of really having goals that really align with your vision and your purpose, and having all of that flow from your core needs. And I know I'm using some terms interchangeably here that it probably shouldn't be, but I hope you can forgive me for that. There is so much value, in fact, in this that I decided to spend the first 10 minutes of the podcast just doing the sales job. I really want you to feel the power and the clarity that comes out of it. And the other reason why I really want to convince you of this is that though I will be presenting my system that I've developed with some significant influences of finding and developing purpose, I think you should take this system and adapt it to your own needs, play around with it, make it your own, and you need more motivation for that than just to follow something step by step. So I wanted to know the end reward. So with that said, I'll tell you my open beta version of the system. It's not fully developed, but I have used it and it has proved very useful to me. So let me go step by step here. So the first step is to prepare your mind by focusing it on purpose and assessing your present goals and desires. And what I used personally was Brian Tracy's book named Goals. It has a lot of exercises at the end of each chapter, mostly questions on the subject, and this is where I started, and it really helped me put myself into this way of thinking. And then I didn't exactly follow the system in the book, but kind of went with what felt more natural to me. And I'm sure you can, if you search for them, you can find these purpose development questions elsewhere on the internet as well. I don't at the moment know a lot of resources on this, but feel free to send me your recommendations to valiantgrowth@gmail.com. So once you've done this, and once you have an idea of what is in your mind right now and the level you're at, I want you to peel away the layers until you find the core needs. What I mean by that is, and I've already talked about this, take a goal that you have right now. Say that you want to become a millionaire, to use a pretty generic example. There are so many reasons why you'd want that, and you want to know what that reason is. So maybe you think about it, and the reason why you want to become a millionaire is financial independence, in the sense that you want to be able to never have to work again and have a lot of safety. Okay, so we peeled away a layer and we're getting closer still, but let's take another step. Why is it that you never want to have to work again? Is it safety? Is it that you don't want to worry about the instability of your job or what the future might bring? Is it freedom? Is it a desire to be able to do what you want and be where you want at all times? And peel away the layers of everything you've written down in these exercises until you get to your core needs and name them. Find the words. My own are self-esteem, impact, freedom, companionship, and safety. So these are my 5 core needs. And once you have the words, find the definitions and write them down. Because it's one thing to have a word, it really adds a lot of clarity when you actually define it. And my experience with this was that I went through it a number of times and I found better and better words, and I found clearer and clearer definitions. And I definitely recommend you to do the same thing. Not where you don't do anything else, but until you feel a level of satisfaction with having identified these core needs. So once you've done that, step 3 is to quantify them, in a sense, quantify your position, to build scales of achievement. So for instance, you might have freedom, and in the definition you might have freedom to do what you want, to be where you want, to be with the people that you want. These are, first of all, 3 different scales, and second, there are different levels here. So for instance, being employed as a CEO and having a commitment of 80 hours per week is a lower level of freedom than being just a regular employee with 40 hours, which is then even lower than a part-time employment situation, which then is even lower than being financially independent and having all the time in the world. And you want to build these skills for step 4, where you will assess your present position. And that will really help you see where you are in meeting your core needs, your broken down and expanded core needs. And it will also automatically suggest you the next steps. And using this, you move out to step 5, which I called establishing the big picture of your goals. And it's basically taking the next step on your scale, the next step that you haven't achieved yet, and writing it down as a goal. It's not going to be an actionable goal. It's not going to be a SMART goal, for those of you in the know, but it will really help you identify the next step. So you might want to write down, for freedom, I want to have 20 hours committed instead of 40 hours. Or you might want to write, for freedom of coworkers, that you want to move from having no influence on who you work with to having some influence to who you work with. And it is vague, but we'll define it more later. Step number 6, once you have these written down, and I had 10 or 15 when I did it, so you'll have a lot to work with. What you will do is brainstorm 30 ideas for each big picture goal. So for every sentence that you have, try to find 30 ways in which you can achieve them. And if you're familiar with the rules of brainstorming, follow them. Particularly, don't criticize yourself in this case, and don't be limited. Put down things that are ridiculous, that are not realistic. At this phase, just put down everything that's connected, and you will filter them later. And the idea between 30, it can be really any number. 30 is a good way of stretching your mind, because 10 is easy. 10 will clear what's in your head. 15 will clear what's in your head right now. But then the next 15 will probably stretch you a little bit and engage your creativity. You can do, of course, any number. And at the end of this, you will have a huge list of a couple hundred possible goals. And some of them will repeat. In fact, that is not bad at all. When you're brainstorming, don't consider your previous answers. Or if you do remember them, you'll probably remember some of them. Don't worry about repeating them. It might very well be that to meet different needs, you can do the same thing. And in fact, you're actually looking for this. So you have this big list. Some of the ideas are crazy, some of the ideas are kooky, some of the ideas are not so good, some of the ideas repeat. So your next step, step number 7, is to narrow down the list to your best 5 or 10, whatever options for each goal. And look for the solutions that repeat. This is an idea that I got from Early Retirement Extreme, which is a book that I will probably review in the future. You want to have actions that fulfill several goals at the same time. That is a massive win. So look for the ones that repeat. So once you have this short list, in step number 8, choose 3 to 5 to 7, whatever feels comfortable to you, and smartify them. And for those of you who are not familiar with the framework, SMART goals are goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and timely. And I will not go into too much detail here in this podcast. You might want to do your own research on the subject, or maybe I will have done a podcast in the future on this. But it will really help you move your goals from wishes to something that is actionable and time-bound. So once you've done this, look at these goals and analyze the impact that they have on your core needs. This is basically a checkup exercise, kind of a feedback approach to see that you haven't deviated too far from your core needs. And also it will give you some clarity and some willpower when being challenged on these issues, because you will know that you're doing X, Y, and Z because you're looking to fulfill this and that core need. And that is very valuable. And some goals will have a greater impact on core needs, and others will have a lower impact. Sometimes you have a little bit of a bonus where it really fulfills something essential, but also helps a little bit with something else. And I would try to capture that in my goal impact analysis. I usually give plus for something that has a really significant impact, and plus when it's just a minor positive impact. And also, you might find that your goals actually compete with one another, and sometimes such compromises might be necessary. So you might find that one of your goals really enhances your freedom, but another goal detracts from your freedom. And that might be the case, and what you're looking for in the end is to have a net positive impact. And I'll give you a very personal example in this case. At the moment, I'm looking to make this podcast successful, make it happen, and that will really contribute to freedom, in my case, location freedom, time freedom, and all that. But on the other hand, because it's not going to be enough money, I also have to find a part-time job, which in turn reduces my freedoms to a significant extent, but adds me a core safety and a core level of stability that wouldn't be there. So I just said I will compromise at the moment until the podcast is self-sufficient, self-funding. And I know that when I add together these two goals, I still get an increased freedom plus other core needs that are being met. So once you have this, look at your analysis and create what I call in step 10 a period purpose summary. And by period, I mean the period which is covered by your goal setting. And the purpose summary is basically summarizing what core needs you'll be working on. And you can create some really cool sentences that you can then read from time to time, and it will really give you clarity on, okay, right now, this month, this week, this year, whatever, I'm working on this, and this. And I have a friend who actually has named years, which I find really cool. So he has a year of belonging, for instance, and then he knows that in his day-to-day activity, one of still the big picture goals is to enhance his level of belonging. And I really admire people with such level of clarity, and you can get to this as well. And then in step 11, you actually get to the level of creating plans, creating projects. I will not be detailing this in this podcast just because it is beyond the scope and because there are many approaches. If you don't have a system learned already, I recommend creating your own. And that might delay you potentially if your system is not as good as that of people who do this for a living. It's probably not going to be, but it will really help you understand some of the issues present. And when you then start studying the systems of others, you can really see where they shine, and you can really understand it having worked already in the field. That is what I recommend. But if you don't want to do that, find a book on the subject and implement a planning procedure from that. If you got Brian Tracy's goals, that has a system. You might want to look into Getting Things Done, which I'm currently reading and which is amazing and probably will be a review in the future. Just make the plans. Also, create the rules and the habits that you will apply to your life. At least I have this distinction where a rule is some kind of daily thing that actively supports a set goal, whereas a habit is everything else that is also a daily or periodical activity, but is not directly linked to my goals. or my main goals. And once you have this set up, step 12 is to review and repeat them periodically. See how you've done in achieving your goals. Take a look at your core needs. Record the gains and the losses on the scales and find the new areas where you have to develop. I would commit to a certain period, but what that period is might be different from person to person. For me, at this moment in my life, I actually do it once a month, and that may be appropriate for you, or you might want to do something more long-term, short-term. Just have a period so you know that all this work you've put in will actually provide you value over and over again in the future, because of course reviewing takes a lot less time. And if we're on the subject of the time, and these were the steps, the price of this in terms of how much time this will take you, for me it was actually 2 weeks. When I was off from work, I was on a holiday, and I actually devoted these weeks to working on this. Now, I wasn't working 16 hours per day. It was more like 3 or 4 hours per day that I actually devoted to this. And I couldn't do more because it's pretty deep work, pretty soul-searching work. It's also pretty creative work. So that was my limit. You have to see what you can do. So it does take time to develop, but A, the benefits are amazing, and B, the work itself, I found it very exciting and satisfying. It's one thing to work on other people's goals and what they put in your mind, and it can be so satisfying and exciting to actually take a look at your own life for once, and hopefully for many times in the future. And the results that I had in my life were very, very promising. I had this problem which I call goal cycling, where I would have my mind shift and shift and shift and repeat and repeat and repeat all sorts of competing and diverse goals, some of which were mine, some of which were other people's goals put into my head, some of which were just stuff that I saw that was interesting, and it was really tiring. I could have a day where I wanted to become X, and the next day, no, I wanted to do something else, and of course it wasn't getting anywhere, and it was just frustrating. And once I did this, once I actually, in the brainstorming phase, poured out all my ideas onto paper, my mind stopped repeating them, and that was amazing. Also, I gained a lot of clarity, and it actually formed the basis for my quest to gain greater productivity and to really build a skill in habit forming and all of that, because I had a very good, very connected goal to apply it to, and that changed everything. It did not, as I said previously, push me into action. It did not do that. That is a lower level productivity question. Do not expect that from this. But once I found the way on how to act, the two really fused together and created some very great days of work, of efficient and connected work. So these were the steps, and this is the reason why you should develop your purpose. And again, feel free to adapt your own ideas into this. I believe the more you can tweak your own version, the more you create ownership, the more exciting and interesting it will be. And I will link the book Goals by Brian Tracy in the description, and also Getting Things Done by David Allen. As I said, I recommend the Goals book for the questions and the exercises, and Getting Things Done is a super exciting framework that you might want to look into once you have your goals really set, or the other way around if you want to build a base of efficiency before you get into purpose. That is all for today. Thank you for listening to the Valiant Growth Podcast, and I dare you to flourish today.